the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you along. I am Baen Associate Editor and your podcast host, David Afsharirad. Today, we welcome a new interviewer to the Baen Free Radio Hour. Jeremy Comeaux is the creator, producer, and host for the Chris Kennedy Publishing YouTube channel, a channel devoted to everything CKP, book launches, topics of sci-fi, fantasy, military sci-fi, space opera, and much more. We're excited to have him as part of the team here on the podcast. For his first outing, he talked with DJ Butler about the latest Indrajit and Fix book, Between Princesses and Other Jobs, which is out now in hardcover and all your favorite ebook formats. The Indrajit and Fix series has a buddy cop feel set on the planet Kish, a sort of Mos Eisley Cantina writ large. The series debut was in The Palace of Shadow and Joy, which is out now in mass market paperback and ebook, but you needn't have read it that first entry to enjoy Between Princesses and Other Jobs. The interview is in just a moment, but first, the news. Well, speaking of Indrajit and Fix, head on over to Baen.com and read this month's short story, which features the duo. It's called A Lesson to Those Who Survive. Indrajit and Fix are two friends trying to make a living on the planet Kish. As such, they're part of a jobber team known as the Protagonists. It's not exactly a dream job, but it pays the bills. But when the pair is hired on as part of a team of protagonists to win their way through an ancient mausoleum in search of lost treasure, they find themselves caught in the middle of a family squabble that might turn deadly. That's A Lesson to Those Who Survive by DJ Butler, free to read at Baen.com. And that's it for the news.
Welcome to another episode of Baen Free Radio Hour. I am your host, Jeremy Comeaux. Joining me today is Mr. DJ Butler, writer of adventure stories for all readers. He has been a lawyer, a consultant, a corporate trainer. His interests include languages, guitar, hanging out with his wife and kids, astronomy, and history. Welcome, DJ. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
All right. Well, before we go too far, what we're here to talk about today is your latest release, out now on hard copy and EPUB edition, Between Princesses and Other Jobs. Now, I've read it. I really enjoyed it. And I appreciate you letting me talk to you about it here today. But before we go too far, let's tell people where they can find you online.
Yeah, so in terms of social media, the place where I'm most accessible is on Twitter at David John Butler. You can also follow me on Amazon if you want to keep track of my releases. I've got a website at davidjohnbutler.com, which I put up a website back in the day when what they said to all the writers was you have to have a website. They weren't completely eclipsed by social media, but to a large degree, social media became where people posted sort of, time-sensitive daily kind of content as opposed to like in a blog for most of us, right? But the website's a good place to sort of see what I've published. A great place to stay in contact with me is a great way is my mailing list. My Twitter bio has the mailing list link. You can also go to the website and there's a link to sign up for the mailing list. I typically send an email out every Monday and multiple times a year give away big piles of free books to people. So even if you're like, this guy Dave is a little bit boring, but maybe I want free books by other people, you still might want to go sign up for my mailing list.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't call you boring. I just finished reading this book and I was highly entertained, and I'm interested in jumping into that with you. And I do encourage people to sign up for his newsletter, because if you might miss something on social media. So every time I do a podcast, I always encourage people to sign up for the newsletter for your favorite publishers, for your favorite authors, and follow and like and rate on Amazon. It really helps the authors out. So make sure you do that. So, like I said, we're here to talk about Between Princesses and Other Jobs. Now, this is book 2 in this series. Is that correct?
It is book 2, and the titling scheme of the series requires a preposition. Book 1 originally, when I submitted it, was called The Palace of Sorrow and Joy, and
Mhm.
Tony hated the word sorrow, but she was
Mhm.
okay if I changed it to shadow. But then she wanted a preposition in the Palace of Shadow and Joy. But once you've got a title that distinctive, you have to sort of the titles of the other books have to match. There has to be a
Yeah.
scheme, right? Or at least
Yeah.
it's aesthetically pleasing and tactically advantageous. So the series title, the book's title starts preposition. So Between Princesses and Other Jobs is out now in July of 2023, and early next year, the next book is called Among the Grey Lords, and that's already basically in the can and ready to go.
Awesome. And so, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but how did you come up with the title besides beginning with the preposition?
Yeah, so the series is about two guys. Think, in fantasy literature, the model for them, the predecessor, is Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Mhm.
So they're buddies. They are of necessity men of action, although and even they risk borderline being thugs, right? They're swordsmen.
Mhm.
Um, but neither one of them really wants to be that. Indrajit Twang is the 427th recital thane of his people. He's an epic poet. He has
Mhm.
memorized the epic epithets and the plots to be able to, at the drop of a hat, spill out 30,000 lines of epic poetry, including dramatic performance, voices, and posture, right?
Mhm.
Sadly, his people are on the verge of going extinct. Nobody's interested in hearing the epic of this dying people, and so his what he wants, his quest, is to find an apprentice who will take his place. Fix Fix was raised in an ashrama in a monastery of Salish Bozar the White, the god of useless knowledge, and Fix, whose devotees, the trivials, and the priests, the selfless, um, uh, uh, put into effect their devotion by mastering useless bodies of information. Right. At one point, there's this conversation, but in fact, there's a series of stories in this um, in this collection that are about Salish Bozar specifically. At one point, there's a conversation. I can't recall if it's in this or in book 1 about, well, what constitutes perfect knowledge or perfectly useless knowledge. And
Mhm.
as an example of this guy who has memorized books and books and books um, in a language not only does he not understand, but nobody understands, right? Like he can
Mhm.
reproduce every character, every line. Nobody knows what it means, right? If one day somebody were able to translate and read those characters, his entire body of knowledge might suddenly become useful, and that would raise the question of whether he was then still sufficiently devout, adept of Salish Bozar. So Fix grew up in this environment, um, and fell in love, and he's still in love, and she is not nice to him. And in
Yeah.
book 1 and 2, we don't see her on the stage. We just kind of hear about her.
Mhm.
Uh, and Fix in a way has flipped 180 degrees and wants to be a man of useful knowledge. Uh, he's got a more kind of worldly. Indrajit's knowledge, his education is all this kind of epic poetic and heroic, whereas Fix understands things like how the stock market works,
Mm-hmm.
and things of that nature, right? And so it's sort of a bard. If you want to think about this in terms of D&D classes, it's kind of like an epic heroic bard and a monk who are both forced to kind of make this living. The setting is this dirty, corrupt, dangerous old city, former imperial capital, where these guys are trying to, what they want to do, right? Here's the title. I am answering your question. Here's
Mm-hmm.
the title. What they want to do is rescue princesses, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's Fix's specific
Like we all
princess,
do. Yeah.
yeah, who's like actually married another guy now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or whether it's Indrajit's just more general wanting to be a hero and live a heroic life. What they
Mm-hmm.
want to do is rescue princesses. What they have to do is various kinds of jobs to make a living, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, this is a story about these two guys with this ethos, this orientation, trying to stay honorable, right, while also being formidable and effective at this kind of pseudo law enforcement, but somewhat also sometimes rogues career
Mm-hmm.
that they are in.
So and they're an odd couple, and but that's also what makes it great. Um, but they're also there for one another. It's like about the guy on the side of you. And which I really enjoy. I love the buddy whatever. Like even when I listen to podcasts, if it's one guy just talking, I'm bored. But it's two guys joking around, having a good time, maybe getting a little angry at each other. That's a good time. I can sink my teeth into that. And it's the same thing with books when you've got whether it's a buddy comedy or buddy adventure. Well, this is a little bit of both because you put a lot of comedy into this, and I enjoy that. Is but sorry, a long question. Where how do they come together? And
Yeah.
I'm sure that's in the first book. Well, how do they bond?
The first book, In the Palace of Shadow and Joy, opens up with Indrajit getting shaken down for a debt he owes. He's in debt to a risk merchant, which is to say an insurance broker, because he took a
Mm-hmm.
job basically breaking legs for the insurance broker, and he's bad at it. And he owes money to the broker because he doesn't want to break anybody's legs, not
Mm-hmm.
really. And so he kind of wasted the money and that he earned and can't pay it back and didn't do the job. So he gets summoned back to the broker, and Fix is there, and they are both put on a job, and the broker has reasons to be upset at both of them.
Mm-hmm.
He's unhappy with Fix because Fix, trying to make a living, has set himself up as an off-registry risk merchant. So Fix is illegally competing with his boss, right? And so the plot of book one is it's sort of like Double Indemnity if the protagonists are Fawford and the Grey Mouser, and the whole thing plays out in the Mos Eisley Cantina blown up to the size of New York. So it's a setup. Like they're actually supposed to be the patsies, and they're in fact supposed to die, is what's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to happen in this murder scheme that's all about the way power and wealth are distributed in this city. So it's in book one that they make friends, and the way power and wealth are distributed, right? So the city of Kish is an old imperial capital. It's got a kind of a Vancian feel to it in some ways, or sometimes kind of a borderline Star Wars feel to it. There's There's a
Mhm.
proverbial 1,000 races of man in this setting. What the characters don't know is that in their past, there's a gene war that was fought on this planet that resulted in all kinds of super soldiers being created who then bred and became the various races of man. Right? They don't see this or talk about it. They just see people who look like frogs and have three sexes, or
Mhm.
are large and blue skinned with one pair of arms that's invisible, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The sexless guns who are big white, who have multiple eyes, three pairs of eyes, and to avoid going insane, they scratch out two pairs of eyes during the gun's childhood, and they've got a cluster of insectoid limbs sprouting out of the back of their shoulders, right? Like it looks like Star Wars, but in a sword and sandals kind of setting. And the power mechanic I was kind of talking about in the a minute ago, like what is it that drives the plot of book one, is when the last emperor died, seven of his principal servants basically seized control together, and their descendants rule as the seven great families of Kish, and they have titles that go back to the job they did at the time, right? So there's like the Lord Stargazer and the Lord Marshal and the Lord Archer, uh, and uh, uh, and the Lord Chamberlain, and now what they do is the city of Kish does not have a permanent government. It has an auction house, and tasks are auctioned off mostly to the seven families, although sometimes to other people. Kind of on the model of Roman tax farming. So, hey, I will undertake to provide security on the holy days to these neighborhoods.
Mhm.
Fine, and I win the auction. I pay for that right, and then I go and I make money back by shaking down all of the pilgrims when they want to pass through the gate, right? So, so the city is full of what are called jobber companies or jobbers in the stories, which are mercenaries. This old, huge, decadent city full of mercenaries sitting on top of the archaeological tell, the ruin heap of its former selves, which is functionally speaking a massive dungeon underneath its feet, right? So yeah, that's book one. The two become friends, and the stories are to a significant degree driven by banter. These guys. I mean, this is a way that men often interact, right? You
Mhm.
get to know each other and kind of test limits and figure each other out, even when you're just even no, not in every setting and not with every person, right? But by little jabs.
Talking trash. Yeah.
Yeah, talking trash, right? Talking smack, a little bit, little humorous jokes,
Mhm.
and often the dynamic is like the longer you've known someone, the more you're able to tell withering jokes at their expense and take withering jokes from them, and that's these guys, right? So they're going around having every story is an adventure. It's a mystery or it's it's a quest. Um, but but every story is also a conversation between these two guys
Mhm.
about what they are doing, and they are constantly jabbing at each other. Um, so they're
That's what I.
so they're running jokes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I enjoyed about it. It's just because I come from a family of six boys,
Mm.
and that was life. We beat the hell out of each other with our hands and our words, and that's how it was. And it was and that kind of brought that back to because they almost seem like brothers, even though they're so opposite of one another. Um, Now you mentioned their organization as jobbers. What made you call them the protagonists?
they debate this over the course of the first book. By the way, I'm the oldest child. I have 4 brothers. I have a sister. She was born last, so I love my sister. She was 8. I was 18 when she was born, so it's like almost like she's not in the same family. Like that's not
Mm-hmm,
quite right.
mm-hmm,
Like I didn't grow up with her, right? I grew up with 5 brothers, so yeah,
mm-hmm.
that same dynamic. Like I get it, and that is a good way to think of it. These guys absolutely save each other again and again, take a wound for each other, right? No problem. Also, give each other hell over, you're short, you have a silly voice, your head looks like a fish, right? No one
Yeah.
wants to hear your silly thing, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they debate the name. They kind of, during the course of book 1, they're feeling each other out. Maybe we should do that. This is working well. We should maybe kind of, I don't know, we could partner up, and what would we call each other, or what we call ourselves. And so, the protagonist reflects their desire. Well, so first of all, the word is ambiguous, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because one meaning for protagonist is somebody who fights on behalf of somebody else. So a protagonist is a word that has been used to mean like a duelist,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm going to fight on behalf of my client. But of course, in literary theory, it means the hero, right?
Yeah.
So that's the deliberate, that's the ambiguity, sort of, on which they want to hang their hats. Like, man, we want to be the heroes. Do we have to fight for someone else? We do. They end up basically in the pay of Orem Thrush, the Lord Chamberlain, who is not an especially nice person.
Mm-hmm.
They basically end up going after people who are worse than them, right? So it's they can kind of maintain some level of honor or decency. What they want is to be rescuing princesses, right? And so when the opportunity arises to do that in the context of their employment or otherwise, they'll do it at the drop of a hat.
So we keep on saying, the stories. So for people who haven't bought the book, which why haven't you? But it's not a typical book in that it is a collection of short stories with like a novella-ish at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is what sometimes has been called a fix-up novel. So there are 10 short stories in a novella. And the short stories were all previously published various places. Baen's website, a couple of Baen anthologies. I want to say 4 or 5 of them were published. The largest number were published by Chris Kennedy's fantasy imprint, New Mythology. New Mythology with editor Rob Howell. I think one of them was published by Hemmeline. Joe Monston is the editor. So the shorts were all previously published, although I think probably people who have read the first novel, were not necessarily aware of the shorts coming out afterwards. But even if you bought all 10 of those anthologies, or it's not 10, all 9 of those anthologies, and read the one on the website and printed it out, put into your binder, there is a new novella called "The Politics of Wizards," in which Indrajit and Fix go up against, or that's not quite right, get more deeply involved than they would like in a battle among several of Kish's powerful magicians.
So through these, you kind of dipped your toe into some different universes by writing some of these short stories. One of them being the 4HU, writing about the Depic, or including the Depic in your story and everything. Are there any universes that you would like to see these guys in that you haven't done yet?
Yeah, that's the only one And Casey and Marisa did an interview, did an anthology of stories set in the Chris County Publishing 4HU with the Four Horsemen universe, which is basically military SF. It's military SF that's got a little bit of a furry edge in that it has things like big purple bears and cat assassins. Marisa and Casey. I don't know which of them originated this, but between them somehow they're responsible for this species of vicious assassin cats. They look like house cats, but yes, called the Depic. And so I was invited to write a short story. They invited me to submit a short story, and I said, "Well, are you okay if we do a tie-in?" So there's this story. I think it's called Paths of the Hunter. And it's about basically a pair of Depics. There's a lost kitten, and there's a hunter that has come to rescue the kitten. Is what really this is all about. And so the direct answer to your question is that's the only one that's a tie-in to anybody else's universe, and I don't plan to do others. But the larger answer is. Is that it might happen, and the reason why is this setting was original. Look at the setting, okay? There are like a thousand races of man. There's like this super old corrupt city full of violence and crime, sitting on top of a 100-layer deep dungeon. Like this setting was designed to have lots of people write in it. Or tell stories by playing tabletop role playing or other games, right? Like by design, that's what this is for. That is that, and I think you don't know maybe, Jeremy, what I'm about to tell you. It's not really like this might be the most public place where it's been said. Just recently, on my Discord server. I have a Discord server. It's very active. If you follow me on Twitter or email me through my website, I can add you to it. On my Discord server, more or less spontaneously, like mice being born out of a pile of rags in the corner of the room, the idea arose that there should be a game book for this setting. And so that is happening. Like that came out of like many interesting things in my life, kind of came out of nowhere, and in this case, just recently. So we're working on, it's going to be a system agnostic game setting. In other words, here's a book. Do you want to play D&D in this setting? Well, here's a PDF talking about how to make that work. And then the book is full of all kinds of information. It doesn't have like character classes or whatever. It's not game data. It's everything else. It's like information on the locations and the history and how to tell stories here and whatever. But hey, maybe you like the hero system. You like GURPS. You like Savage Worlds. One of the game systems we're going to produce a little guide for is Traveler, because there's no reason you couldn't put this city, this planet, into a Traveler story, right? You could have a Traveler campaign where you could say, like, well, our characters are, former GDCO employees, and we're whistleblowers about the illegal psionics program, and now we're fleeing both GDCO assassins and, Imperial law enforcement, and we're hiding down here in this crazy city with 1,000 different alien races, and we've only got, 4 energy cells for our guns, right? Absolutely is a kind of story that could be told in this setting, with a game or in a short story, right, or otherwise. So no plans, but what is it possible? It's absolutely possible. And in fact, we're working on a book to empower people to do exactly that. and this leads me to kind of a related point. But by the way, you're going to find, Jeremy, that some authors, you have to really pry words out of them, like to make them talk. And I'm not one of them. So I will say,
I've had a few of those.
oh yeah, of course you have. So, so I say the book is sword and sorcery. I think a better way to think about it is that it sort of appears to be sword and sorcery, or it reads as sword and sorcery. And what I mean is, it is unclear, even at the end of book 3, which comes out in, January of next year, if there really is magic as we think of it in this setting. This is one of the things the characters debate from time to time. It was one of the ongoing subjects in book 1. It comes up again in book 2 from time to time. Like, is there actually magic? So, in book 1, very specifically, everything that sort of appears to be magic is actually strange biology. So I'll give you maybe at least one example. Okay, they're going into the opera house. Their job is to protect this opera singer. They don't realize they're being set up to take the fall for a crime. And they see another jobber company there. And they're not jobbers. They're just like two guys. They're just like hired thugs, right? But there's like a jobber company there with like uniforms and the whole deal. And they have a big, this jobber company has this big grow conch, which is they have a female grow conch, and they're sort of frog people, and they Indrajit, through his heroic poetry, his epic poetry paradigm, has epic epithets about them, and talks about they're famous for their magical ability to be unsurprisable. They can see people coming even from behind them. It's a psychic power. It's magic. And there is and there's a and there's a smaller grow conch, which he says, and that's male. Well, it turns out the grow conch does see behind her, but the reason she does is because the thin one with her is not male. It's actually a sexless so-called third. It's a male that fell off the back of the female and then matured to a greater height. Her back is covered with her mates. She has just like nipples all over her back, and she has little. Her mates, the males, look like tadpoles, and they're just stuck all over her back, and they're feeding off her, but they're also like fertilizing her through the same kind of organ, right? Or orifice. Maybe it's not an organ. So my apologies if anyone's squeamish and now feeling ill. But the point is, like, her back looks like it's kind of just sort of a heap of jelly, but it's got a bunch of males in it who can see. And so if someone comes to attack the female, they respond, and she knows something's happening behind her, right? So it is weird biology, but like it's interpreted as magic. And even through the story, the politics of wizards, is it the case that some of what we're seeing clearly is technology? Maybe all of what we're seeing is technology or strange biology, right? So arguably, the Indrajit and Fix stories are actually science fiction. They're actually about these two guys, and yes, they fight with swords, or in Fix's case, a sword, a spear, an axe, a falchion, a dagger, or whatever comes to hand, right? But they live in a universe where there are not really spells. It's that some people have laser guns or super exotic biological abilities, and others don't.
Yeah.
Which is a lot of fun to write.
And
if you're a game master, or if you were to write a short story for an anthology one day, you can make up your own race of weird things that do something biologically weird, or your own ancient technology, and it'll fit right into the setting.
That's awesome. The interactive part, I believe, is going to be really fun in this universe. So speaking of fun characters and everything, do you have a character that you wrote that was really fun for you to create or write, whether it's just a throwaway character or a main character or anything like that?
Well, I love all of them. The main characters are both, all of my main characters, maybe, but
Mhm.
certainly both of these guys are in some sense a reflection of me, right?
Mhm.
And so I feel great affection for them. They get joined by a Keon about halfway through these stories, which is a dog-headed man.
Mhm.
Um,
I was hoping you
who,
were going to go there.
yeah, Munahim. He's fun. The story with him opens with him warning them that if he gets excited, he might eat his feces, and he doesn't want them to be shot. Right.
Yeah.
uh, Obviously, this is like a sort of, it's not the only one, but it's one of several I've written. It's a sort of a personification of my own dog and my
Hmm.
experience with growing up with dogs. Right. And Munahim is everything you'd think about a humanoid dog. Like, he's got a great sense of smell and hearing.
Hmm.
Um, he's loyal. He's got a lot of stamina. He's not necessarily the most imaginative, right? His pack ran out on the steppe, far away from the city, and so he's still just sort of trying to get his arms around just what a cynical place this is. So this is one of the kind of the running jokes. There's a sort of proverbial, uh, not quite a joke, but a way of talking. In the city, welcome to Kish, and then some kind of really cynical part B,
Hmm.
right? Uh, Welcome to Kish, lock up your daughter, or something,
Hmm.
right? Like,
Hmm.
and so his kind of adjusting to that and trying to learn it is one of the running gags. He's also the only character, as of the end of book 3. He's the only one who's carried the point of view other than Indrajit and Fix. Actually, other than Indrajit, Fix has never been the point of view character. It's
Yeah.
Indrajit, but there's one short story called Good Boy from Munahim's perspective,
Hmm.
when his bosses get kidnapped and he has to go rescue them. So it's fun thinking about, through some of these stories, like, how does the story work when one of the characters can talk but also has the sense of smell of a dog, right?
Hmm. It might
Book
eat its own poop.
and might eat his own poop or other kind of like awful things. Book 3 in particular, a lot of it happens in Underkish. It happens beneath the city. And we see that in book 1. We see that in a couple of stories. We really see it in book 3. Um, and having someone who doesn't rely on light to get around turns out to be a pretty great advantage. But
Yeah.
I like a lot of the minor characters, though. Like the risk merchant in book 1, who employs both these guys, is named Tisa Fernay's Holy Pot, and he has 2 faces
Mhm.
on his one head has 2 faces, and he keeps one of them veiled at all times. And through the veil, it appears to be a feminine face. And he's got a bit of a speech impairment where he says bees like peas. And so there's one point where one of them says to the other, "Is it possible that we're misunderstanding him? And his name isn't Holy Pot at all; it's Holy Bot." And we're
Mhm.
just, right. So he's a lot of fun and very nefarious. In this book, I really like. There's a character I like so much, I brought him back for book 3, named Jackster Boom.
Mhm.
Um, where do these characters' names come from, by the way? In the 3 books, there are basically 4 places where people get their names from. Okay, some of them are Indian names, like Indrajit. Some of them are Ugaritic, which is an ancient Syrian city It's like in space and time, it's ancient Israel's closest neighbor, like 13th century BC Syria. Okay, so Munahim is the same word as Menachem, like a modern Hebrew name, but like it's the Ugaritic version from 3,400 years ago. There are a few characters who have Greek or sort of fake Greek names. And then there's a bunch of characters who basically have Star Wars names. Okay? Like, we're just trying to sound cool. Jackster Boom is one of them. And they meet him in a story about halfway-ish through this collection, and then he becomes important again in book 3. They meet him in a story because they're trying to find somebody. What they believe is they're tracking a thief, okay? And the thief is being held prisoner by a fence and named Jackster Boom in one of the city's worst districts. Now, in some sense, every district of the city has a claim to be the worst because they're all awful in some way or another. But the dregs is the one that is just unredeemable. Like, it's just a cesspit of crime and drugs and violence. There's no trade that goes on there, other outside of those things. It is just brutal, relentless, dark. It's where Fix lived as a boy. Well, he was orphaned before he was picked up by the ashrama and raised to be a trivial of Salish Bozar the White. And Jackster Boom is a fence there. And so when they go down into Jackster Boom's lair, they see a glass tank full of water, and they see I think it's a young woman and a young man, or two young men, stand to either side of the tank on these short blocks, just kind of wearing just like rags and looking kind of glassy-eyed, right? And they're kind of standing there going, well, who's, where's Jackster Boom? And then suddenly a giant eyeball presses itself against the glass, and two tentacles reach over the top and insert themselves into the back of the heads of these two young people, who then begin to speak in unison the words of Jackster Boom, right? And it turns out that his nickname, the Puppeteer, does not come from him being a fence with, lots of people doing his bidding. It comes from the fact that he's basically this octopus thing that lives in a tank and parasitically invades the skulls of other creatures to control their vocal cords to be able to talk. And so I like that. It's gross. He's pretty bad. So I brought him back he's in a story in this novel, and I brought him back for book 3 as well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I particularly liked that story because it was gross.
Yeah.
And the action in it was pretty good too. I enjoyed the action without giving anything away. It was a good action scene. But I'm really glad that you brought up the dog character, because that was a favorite of mine too. I really enjoy, because I have dogs and I can relate. I'm always fussing at my dogs for eating their shit. And but I also enjoy. So now, before I go too far, unlike Star Wars in a galaxy far, far away a long time ago, this is into the distant future, correct?
So this is actually, none of the characters know this, but I haven't been especially secretive about it. This is actually meant to be Earth in the distant future.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, there are a few hints, more in book 1 than in the stories, but there are a few hints, and a few hints only, that give away that, oh wow, this is actually Earth.
And another thing I enjoyed were the at least one pop culture Easter egg in there from old TV show. without giving it away. But it was fun. It's like, oh, I know what that is. It's fun to find those things
Yeah.
in there. And so the comedy, the action, the pseudo magic, things like that is very, very entertaining, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to read more about it. Speaking of, so uh, we're gonna have book 3. Can we? And that's coming out in January. Can we expect more?
Well, I hope, book 1 came out in July of 2020, which was just an absolutely awful time for a book to launch. People were
Mhm.
in lockdown, they had lost their jobs, they were worried about losing their jobs, right? They were dealing with sick loved ones, they were being browbeaten to stay inside and shut up, and it was a terrible time, and book 1 frankly didn't get the audience that I hoped it would. So we're putting out book 2 and book 3, and doing some marketing, and like I said, we're gonna we my not Baen we my Discord friends are gonna put out a game book, and the hope is to drive enough audience that we can write more. I can at least write, short stories. They make great. Well, I should say, I think as of when this airs, there should be a short story about them called for the edification of those who remain, or something like that,
Mhm.
up on the Baen website, and another one coming kind of soonish in an anthology. So I think if nothing else, I will probably continue to write short stories and eventually collect those. But I hope I do get to write more novels. It's not the kind of story. There's no Sauron, right? There's not a Dark Lord who needs to be defeated, but the characters do have ongoing quests. Indrajit is looking for an apprentice, and I would like to get to the story um, that resolves that. Fix lives a life of unrequited love, and that actually plays a big part in book 3, but doesn't really resolve his need to sort of be a man of love, to be a lover, right? So, knock on wood, if they sell well enough, if Tony continues to be kind to me, then I hope there will be more.
Awesome.
You're not going to end this book or book 3 on a cliffhanger going, oh, what happens next? Because they're not that kind of book. But
Mhm.
they are the kind of book that, until I kill the characters, which I don't intend to do, there can always be more stories.
That's awesome. No, they're great characters. I really enjoyed it. One last question. So the first book came out before the short stories, which at least from what I've seen, usually somebody will put a short story in an anthology, and a book will come from that. But in this case, the book came out first. You started writing the short stories. Was it always your thought to collect these short stories and turn them into a book, or did it just kind of happen that way?
I did think I would. I actually thought there was a pretty good chance I was going to have to self-publish them. But then
Mm.
I went ahead and wrote the novella and pitched it all to Tony as a fix-up novel, and she went for it, which makes me very happy. And it works chronologically as a novel because this is entirely after book 1 and
Mhm.
entirely before book 3. So you don't have to read them and be like, oh, but I remember this story happens before. Like, no, they read like 3 novels back to back
Yeah.
in sequence.
Yeah, it was like I said, I'm not just sucking up. It's a good read. I recommend it to everybody now and future people watching the podcast. Go buy it. It's out now in hardback and every version of EPUB. Go check it out. And if you could tolerate my voice, you can catch me out on YouTube land and Chris Kennedy Publishing. I do a regular podcast there, but that's enough about me. Um, And DJ, so where can people find you out in the wild?
Yeah, an easy place to start is Twitter. Come find me on Twitter. David John Butler is my handle. Or if you want, davidjohnbutler.com, John with an H, David John Butler. From either of those places, you can get to my mailing list. You can email me personally. I'm pretty accessible.
And don't forget to go follow him on Amazon, like and review. It really helps our authors out when you do that. What about out in the world with conventions and things like that? Where can people see you there?
I'm reasonably active, not as much as I used to be. There was a year I went to over 20 events, but still upcoming in 2023. So I just did LibertyCon and a new event in Utah called Writers Cantina. Dragon Con is next. There is a writers workshop being organized in November called the Evanston Writers Workshop, something like that, in Chicago. If you Google Evanston Writing Workshop Chicago, I think their still under construction website will come up, and you'll see me listed. I think those are the two things I currently have committed for the rest of the year. But I typically do 5 or 6 events a year, and again, so you maybe can't tell this from the video, but I'm 6.5 feet tall. I usually wear surprising hats like tricorns or badger pelts. I'm very easy to find. Very, very, very approachable. Come talk to me. Happy to talk to you about whatever.
Where, unlike me, I tend to blend in with the furniture as short as I am. Well, thank you again, everyone. It is the book is Between Princesses and Other Jobs. It's out on hardback. It's out on EPUB. Go check it out. It's a great read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, it's going to make me go read book 1. So go check it out. And thanks to Baen for letting me host today. And thank you, sir, for letting me talk to you. And hopefully we'll talk in the future. But for now, that is it. Until next time, good night.
Thanks, Jeremy.
And now we bring you our audiobook serialization of Tinker by Wen Spencer. Inventor girl genius Tinker lives in a near-future Pittsburgh, which now exists mostly in the land of the elves. She runs her salvage business, pays her taxes, and tries to keep the local ambient level of magic down with gadgets of her own design. When a pack of wargs chase an elven noble into her scrapyard, life as she knows it takes a serious detour. Tinker finds herself taking on the Elven Court, the NSA, the Elven Interdimensional Agency, technology smugglers, and a college-minded xenobiologist as she tries to stay focused on what's really important, her first date. Armed with an intelligence the size of a planet, steel-toed boots, and a junkyard dog attitude, Tinker is ready to kick butt to get her first kiss.
Oil Can shook his head. The sink only has about 2 hours of power left. How's Windwolf? At the moment, holding steady. Lane says that he's likely to worsen, though, once the power gives out. Then they couldn't stay at Lane's. Magic wasn't like electricity. You didn't flip a switch and get current flooding the power lines. Instead, like a gentle rain after a drought, magic would need to saturate the area and soak in deep until the depleted earth couldn't hold anymore, and then form usable runoff. Even after startup, it would take hours before the ambient level of magic in Pittsburgh would be where anyone could do a healing spell and expect it to work. Tinker checked to see if she still had the cancel spell printout, and then levered herself out of the chair. We should be sitting at the rim nearest to the hospice at startup. Windwolf woke as they prepared to move him back to the truck, blinking in confusion. "Lie still," Tinker said to him, and repeated it in low Elvish. "Ah, my little savage," Windwolf murmured, lifting his good hand to her. "What now?" "We're running out of time. which is unfortunately common for us humans. Tinker squeezed his hand in what she hoped was a reassuring manner.
Does life go by so quickly, then?
Yes, Tinker said, thinking of leaving Pittsburgh in a few months and already regretting her promise to Lane. It must be nice, having all the time to do all the things you want to do. He turned his head and looked out the window.
There is a graveyard on that hill. I see them all the time here in your city. We do not have them. We do not die in such numbers. But it never truly struck me as to what these graveyards meant until now. All around you, the churches and the graveyards, death constantly stands beside you. I don't know how you tolerate the horror.
It scared her to hear him talking about death. I'll get you to a hospice at startup, she promised, but you'll have to hang in there until then.
Hang in?
He looked mystified by the English slang. Keep fighting.
Life is a marvelous adventure, he whispered, and I wish not to end it now, especially now that things have gotten even more interesting.
They eased back down Riverview Road and through the maze of side streets to Ohio River Boulevard. There, the traffic snarled into knots as people fleeing the city collided with those trying to get back in. It took them an hour to travel the 2 or 3 miles to the first major split in the road. The night was sweltering, as only July in Pittsburgh could be. They rode with the windows down, and in the mostly stopped traffic, those without air conditioning got out and stood waiting outside their cars for the chance to crawl ahead.
There's Nathan's 20-car accident. Oil Can indicated a score of wrecked cars and trucks sitting under the floodlights of the stadium parking lot.
It wasn't difficult to guess which vehicle had been involved in the fatality. A red vehicle, make unrecognizable, sat to one side, smashed into an accordion 2 feet tall.
How do you suppose they manage that in this type of traffic?
One of the semis lost its load. Tinker pointed out the haphazardly loaded trailer. It must have landed on the minivan beside it. The parking lot's entrances, she noticed, had Earth Interdimensional Agency barricades up, and police tape strung at chest height about the cars created an imaginary fence. Looks like someone got caught smuggling in the deal. Judging by the amount of police tape and number of armed men, the EIA, the international agency in charge of almost everything in Pittsburgh, even vaguely related to the elves, had stumbled onto a large illegal shipment. There were 3 tractor-trailer trucks, a dozen large Ryder and U-Haul box trucks, 4 pickup trucks, and the squashed car, any of which could have been the smuggler's vehicle. Unless they had been part of a convoy, it seemed strange that the EIA had impounded the whole lot.
That Peterbilt is nearly new.
The traffic opened up for a few hundred feet. Oil Can grunted slightly as he put in the clutch in order to shift out of first gear into second gear. The clutch in the flatbed, an ancient 2010 Ford F-750, was stiff. Tinker nearly had to stand on it to shift when she drove.
It wouldn't take much to get it back to running.
Tinker drooled at it for a minute. Yeah, but unless it's the smuggling vehicle, and thus no one is willing to claim it, someone will have already made arrangements to get their truck back next shutdown.
One can dream.
Oil Can grunted through another shift back down to first as they dropped to a crawl. Speaking of next shutdown, I told Lane that I'd go to CMU for a term.
You're kidding.
He looked at her as if she had suddenly transformed into something slightly repulsive and totally unexpected, like one of those ugly pug dogs. It'll only be 90 days, and I'd get a chance to see what Earth is like.
I've lived there, Oil Can pointed out. Everything is too big. You can spend all day looking at thousands of people and not see a single person that you know.
They eased up onto the Fort Duquesne Bridge. Below them, barges choked the Ohio, the Allegheny, and the Monongahela rivers. It seemed possible to walk from one shore to the other without touching water. It happened every time Pittsburgh returned to Earth, trade goods coming and going by land, water, and air. She didn't want to think about living someplace this crowded all the time.
You're not helping, she said. It's another world, Tinker. If you don't like it, you'll be stuck and miserable. Maybe I'll like it. He shrugged. Maybe. I don't think so. You hate having someone telling you what to do. Think about it. You're going for classes. You've never been to a regular school. Classes start exactly at 8 a.m. Bang! A bell rings and you have to be sitting in your seat, quiet, facing forward. And you sit there, without talking, for hours, while you study what the teacher wants you to learn. Maybe college is different. Lane seems to think it's a good idea. And Lane likes to putter around in the garden planting flowers. You tried that once. Remember how crazy it drove you? I already told Lane yes. He scowled at her, and then focused on getting through the city. Downtown, despite it being almost 10 o'clock, was filled with activity. Stores were sorting hastily delivered goods, preparing for the startup rush. Once the stores sold out, there would be no more until next shutdown. Fall fashions were appearing in the windows. Anyone who didn't buy early might be facing the Pittsburgh winter without gloves and sweaters. The delivery drivers who were still trying to get home to Earth were few and easily identified. They leaned on their horns, they cursed out their windows, and they disobeyed all laws of man, elf, and common sense in their rush. "Watch, watch, watch!" Tinker shouted, bracing herself as one such idiot cut them off. It was a small, rabid pickup truck streaking through a recently changed red light with horn blasting. At the last moment, it recognized that the flatbed outweighed it by 3 times and veered sharply to avoid them. Only a motorcyclist was in the way. A normal man would have died. The motorcyclist responded with inhuman speed and strength, wrenching his bike out of the pickup's way. "Is he an elf?" Oil Can asked, as he responded to the blare of horns behind him and drove on through the intersection. Tinker leaned out to look back. Strangely, instead of focusing on the pickup truck that nearly hit him, the motorcyclist was watching the flatbed drive away. He was far too homely to be one of the Fae. Under a wild thatch of black hair, he was long-nosed and sharp-featured. "Nah, just lucky," Tinker said, and scrambled through the back window to check on Windwolf.
That was another installment in Wen Spencer's Tinker, and that's it for the podcast. Thanks as always to Audible.com and podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. Praise, thanks, and gratitude to DJ Butler, and welcome aboard to Jeremy Comeaux. And good night, Tony Daniel, wherever you are. This is David F. Shirerod coming to you from a soundproof bunker somewhere deep in the heart of Texas. Join us here next week at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.